In the burning desert where every movement magnified under the sun, she left no trace. No one called her name over the radio. No one saw her shadow on the sand dunes. But when the first volley of gunfire tore through the wind, the men still stood because the enemy fell before understanding what was happening. She was there, higher than eye level, farther than earshot, colder than the desert heat. When the formation advanced without loss, they thought it was luck. Only when dusk fell did they realize their lives were purchased by her invisibility. The sand stretched like an ocean-frozen midwave. Heat shimmer rose from the dunes in invisible columns, bending light until distance became guesswork. Staff Sergeant Derek Holloway wiped sweat from his eyes and checked his map again. The oasis marked on the satellite image lay 3 clicks northeast, but satellite images didn't account for how sand erased landmarks overnight. "Wind's picking up," said Corporal James Riley, squinting at the horizon. His face was already burned despite the sunscreen they'd applied before dawn. 30 minutes, maybe less, before visibility turns to shit. Derek nodded. The mission brief had called this a simple recon. Observe the abandoned compound, confirm it was clear, establish a forward position. Simple. Nothing in the desert was simple. Behind them, 8 more soldiers checked their gear. This was their first deployment to this sector. The local insurgents knew every fold in the sand, every cave, every approach vector. Derek activated his radio. Command, Reaper 1-6. Proceeding to checkpoint Alpha. ETA 40 minutes. Static crackled. Copy, Reaper 1-6. Weather window closing. Advise caution. He didn't respond. Caution was assumed. He signaled his team forward. What none of them knew was that 600 meters northwest, on a ridge they'd passed an hour earlier, someone watched through a scope. She'd been there since before dawn, when the temperature still hovered near freezing and the stars provided enough light to dig her position. Now, as the sun climbed toward its apex, her hide was invisible. A depression in the sand covered with a camouflage net dusted with local sediment, backed by rock that broke her silhouette. She tracked their movement without radio contact. Her breathing was controlled, measured in the spaces between heartbeats. The rifle beside her was zeroed for this distance, this elevation, this wind. The team below moved in diamond formation. Textbook. Predictable. She noted their intervals, their scan patterns, the way the point man favored his right side. Good discipline, but they trusted their training more than their terrain. The desert rewarded paranoia, not procedure. Through her scope, she watched Derek raise his hand. The formation stopped. Good instinct. He'd noticed something, probably the way the sand had been disturbed ahead. Subtle tracks that didn't match wind patterns. They were learning, but learning wouldn't be enough. Her call sign existed only in classified documents that 3 people had clearance to read. On paper, she was Observer 7. In practice, she was no one. No service record accessible through standard channels. No family listed on emergency contacts. No digital footprint beyond what was necessary for her specialized work. Even her medical records were compartmentalized, stored in systems that required biometric authentication and dual authorization to access. She'd spent the last 14 years becoming invisible. The selection course lasted 18 months. 93 started. Or finished. She was the only one who'd stayed active this long. The work demanded a particular kind of person. Someone who could watch friends die without breaking position, who could live in filth for weeks, who understood that glory and recognition were antithetical to survival. More than that, it required someone who could endure the psychological weight of perfect solitude. No celebration when missions succeeded. No comfort when they failed. Just the next position, the next patrol, the next silent vigil. Her real name no longer mattered. She'd buried it alongside the civilian who'd once answered to it. The woman who'd laughed too loudly and trusted too easily. That person died on a rooftop in Kandahar when a mission went sideways and she learned that being seen meant being targeted. Invisibility was evolution. The ridge she occupied offered a 360-degree view. This was her 3rd day in position. She'd brought enough water for 7, enough ammunition for scenarios that would never make official reports. Her kit was minimal. Rifle, ammunition, water, protein bars that tasted like cardboard, a solar panel smaller than a book. No tent, no sleeping bag. At night, temperatures dropped to near freezing, and she endured it without fire or shelter that might create a signature. The soldiers below didn't know she existed. Command didn't broadcast the presence of designated marksmen in overwatch positions. It compromised operational security and created dependency. Better to let teams believe they were alone. Better to let them develop their own instincts. She was insurance, not a crutch. But insurance only worked if it remained unused until necessary. 3 kilometers east, in a cave system that honeycombed the bedrock beneath the sand, a man named Rashid studied a map. The map was hand-drawn, updated constantly with observations from local scouts. It showed water sources, patrol routes, defensive positions, intelligence gathered over months. He was 42, a former engineer who turned to insurgency when his village was destroyed in crossfire. The Americans called it collateral damage. He called it murder. He didn't hate the soldiers personally. Many of them were just boys following orders. He hated the machines, the drones, the satellites that made his homeland transparent while the operators remained invisible behind screens thousands of kilometers away. The asymmetry of it, the injustice. They'll reach the oasis in 30 minutes, said his second, a younger man named Faird. Same approach vector as the last patrol. Rashid nodded. Then they're learning nothing, or they believe their technology makes predictability irrelevant. He studied the terrain features. Deploy the watchers. When they stop for water, when their discipline relaxes, we move. His plan was elegant. Let them reach the oasis, let them relax, let them believe the hard part was over. Then, from 3 directions, triangulated fire. Not to win, they couldn't win against superior training and equipment, but to bleed. To make every patrol costly. To turn simple reconnaissance into calculated risk. What Rashid didn't account for was the woman on the ridge. She saw them before they moved. Not visually, they were too disciplined for that, but through pattern recognition. Birds that should have been roosting instead took flight. A heat shimmer that moved against the wind. Sand that fell in a direction gravity didn't dictate. Small things, invisible to most observers. She adjusted her scope, scanning the likely positions. There, a depression in the rocks, 600 meters south of the oasis. The angle was perfect for enfilade fire. She marked it mentally, noting the range, the wind correction, the time it would take to acquire the target. Then she found the second position. Northwest, higher elevation, thermal signature barely distinguishable from the surrounding rock. That one was the spotter. He'd call the shots, coordinate the attack. Priority target. The third position took longer. It was mobile, using the terrain to mask movement, but movement created patterns, and patterns were signatures. She tracked it through the dancing heat waves, calculating its probable destination. When the attacker reached his firing position, he'd be 740 meters from her hide. Long shot, difficult, but not impossible. She checked her ammunition. 20 rounds in the magazine, 1 in the chamber, 40 more in reserve. She wouldn't need half that. Derek's team reached the oasis at 1340 local time. The water was brackish but drinkable after filtration. They established a perimeter while Nathan and 2 others filled canteens. Standard procedure. Everyone relaxed by increments they didn't notice. Shoulders dropping. Weapon discipline slipping from razor-sharp to merely good. It was human nature. The body couldn't maintain peak alertness indefinitely. Marcus laughed at something James said. The sound carried across the sand, sharp and distinct in the afternoon air. In her hide, she tensed. Laughter was careless. It created acoustic signatures, marked positions, signaled confidence the enemy could exploit. But she couldn't break radio silence to warn them. Her job was observation and intervention, not command. The patrol had their own leadership. She existed in the spaces between, visible only through consequence. The first attacker settled into position. Through her scope, she saw him clearly now, prone behind a rock formation, rifle stabilized on a bipod. His breathing was controlled. trained, not just an opportunistic insurgent, but someone with real skill. He was sighting in on Nathan, who stood exposed near the water, his rifle slung while he worked the filtration pump. She calculated. Wind, 3 knots from the west. Temperature creating significant mirage. Range, 612 meters. Elevation positive 43 meters. The bullet would drop approximately 32 inches at this distance. Drift 6 inches right from the wind. She adjusted her holdover, accounting for the angle and the heat's effect on air density. Her finger found the trigger. Breath control. Heartbeat steady. She waited for the wind to pause, for her pulse to settle into the rhythm that allowed perfect stability. The insurgent shifted, preparing to fire. She squeezed. The rifle's report was swallowed by a sudden gust of wind that chose that exact moment to sweep across the dunes. The suppressor reduced the signature, but it was the timing, the wind's coincidental roar, that made the shot truly invisible. 600 meters away, the insurgent's rifle jerked as the round struck its receiver. Not the man, the weapon. She'd aimed for the weapon, not the person. Disabling shots were quieter than killing shots. A man with a destroyed rifle would retreat, regroup, report. A dead man triggered investigations, retaliations, escalations. The insurgent scrambled backward, confused, searching for the source. His weapon was mangled, the bolt carrier shattered. He looked at the sky, checking for drones, then at the rocks around him. Nothing. He signaled his team and withdrew. At the oasis, Derek froze. He'd heard something. Not a shot, the wind had covered that, but a sound that didn't belong. Metal on metal. Brief. Distant. Weapons up, he ordered. Possible contact. The team reacted instantly, spreading into defensive positions, scanning sectors. But there was nothing to see. No muzzle flash. No movement. The desert was empty. After 2 minutes of silence, Nathan spoke. Maybe the wind hit something. Debris. Derek didn't believe it, but he had no evidence otherwise. Stay sharp. We move in 5. They finished their water break with weapons ready, but no attack came. When they moved out, their formation was tighter, their alertness heightened. They didn't know someone had just saved Nathan's life. The second position was more problematic. The spotter had seen his partner retreat and now swept his binoculars across the landscape, searching for threats. He was good. His search pattern was methodical, overlapping, designed to catch movement. But he was looking for visible enemies. Vehicles, drones, other soldiers. He wasn't looking for ghosts. She remained motionless as his binoculars passed over her position twice. Her hide was perfect, blending with the natural shadows and textures of the ridge. Even thermal imaging would struggle. She'd positioned herself where the rock absorbed and radiated heat at the same rate as her body, creating no distinguishable signature. The patrol moved northeast, away from the oasis, following their planned route toward the compound. Good. That put them outside the most dangerous crossfire zone. But the spotter was now calling in reinforcements. She could see him speaking into a radio, gesturing toward the oasis, coordinating something. For new contacts appeared on the horizon. They moved with the confidence of local knowledge, using wadis and depressions to mask their approach. They were flanking the patrol, trying to get ahead of them. Copy. Advise if situation develops. The patrol navigated the pass carefully, weapons ready, but found nothing. No shell casings, no bodies, no evidence of an attack that had been seconds from execution. Weather in the desert turned without warning. The wind that had been steady shifted to gusts, then to sustained force that bent scrub brush horizontal. Within 20 minutes, visibility dropped from kilometers to meters. Sand filled the air in a brown curtain that obliterated landmarks, compasses, and confidence. Derek made the call immediately. Reaper 1-6 to all elements. RTB. Return to base. Stay together. But staying together in a sandstorm was theory, not practice. The wind howled at 40 knots, carrying away voices shouted from arm's length. The team clustered close, linking equipment with tethers, lengths of paracord clipped to load-bearing vests. But even then, Shapes disappeared into the maelstrom. Visibility dropped to less than 5 meters. Men 3 steps away became ghosts. She watched the storm roll in from her elevated position. At first, she had minutes before it reached her. She used them to mark the patrol's last known position, to calculate their probable route based on their training and the terrain features they'd memorized. Then the storm hit her ridge and her world became brown chaos. Most observers would have abandoned their position, sought shelter, waited out the storm. But shelter meant moving, and moving meant losing situational awareness. She'd trained for this. In Wyoming, they'd buried candidates in snow and made them observe targets for 72 hours. In Arizona, they'd run exercises during haboobs that blotted out the sun. This was just another variable. She sealed her scope, protected her rifle's action, and relied on other senses. Sound became primary. The storm created a baseline roar, but within it, trained ears could distinguish variations. Voices, movement, weapons fire. The insurgents used the storm as cover. Of course they did. They knew this terrain, knew that storms were opportunities. She heard them moving, closer than before, emboldened by the weather. The patrol had found a depression and was sheltering, but their position was compromised. The insurgents had tracked them, were now approaching from 2 sides. In zero visibility, the attack would be point blank. Decisive. She made a decision that broke protocol. She fired 3 rounds, spaced 5 seconds apart, into the sand 30 meters from the patrol's position. Not at targets, at Earth. The sound would carry despite the wind. Distinct from natural noise. Pattern. 3 shots. Deliberate spacing. Derek heard them. He understood immediately. 3 rounds, evenly timed, was a signal. Someone was out there. Someone was warning them. Move, he shouted. Northeast. Now. The team moved blind, trusting their compass, their training, and a warning from an unknown source. They stumbled through the sand, maintaining contact through tethers and trust. Behind them, the insurgents reached the depression and found it empty. They'd missed by minutes. When the storm cleared an hour later, the patrol was 2 kilometers from where they'd sheltered. Exhausted, disoriented, but alive. They'd used the storm's cover to break contact, to escape what would have been an overwhelming ambush. Derek stared at the desert around them. Somewhere in that expanse, someone had fired warning shots. Someone had known where they were, where the enemy was, and had intervened without identifying themselves. Who the hell is out there? James asked. Derek shook his head. He had no answer. Back at base, Derek filed his report. The after-action review focused on the sandstorm, the equipment degradation, the successful evasion. But he added a paragraph about the anomalies. The destroyed rifle at the oasis, the ricochet at the pass, the warning shots during the storm. The intelligence officer, Captain Laura Brennan, read the report twice. You're saying someone's been following you. Not following. Watching. Protecting. Maybe. Our forces. Unknown. No radio contact. No visual identification. Laura pulled up satellite imagery, but the sandstorm had obscured everything during the critical hours. Thermal imaging showed heat signatures consistent with the patrol and several possible hostiles, but nothing conclusive. She classified the report and forwarded it up the chain. Someone with higher clearance could decide whether to acknowledge the invisible guardian or maintain the silence. Among the patrol members, speculation ran rampant. Nathan believed it was a drone with advanced AI. James thought it was Special Operations, Delta or SEAL team running parallel operations. Marcus offered the most unsettling theory, that they were being watched by someone who didn't want credit, who operated outside normal command structures. Why would someone do that? Nathan asked. Because the moment people know you're there, Marcus said, you become a target. Derek listened, but didn't participate. He understood something the others hadn't grasped yet. Whoever was out there had saved their lives multiple times without asking for recognition. That level of selflessness, that degree of operational security, suggested training and motivation beyond conventional special operations. It suggested someone who'd chosen invisibility as a permanent condition. Night in the desert was a different world. Temperatures plummeted from 42 degrees to near freezing in hours. The wind died. Sound carried for kilometers in the still air. Stars emerged in layers so bright they cast shadows. It was beautiful and lethal. The patrol had established a defensive position for the night, a rocky outcropping that provided cover and elevation. They rotated watch in 2-hour shifts, thermal scopes scanning the darkness for heat signatures that didn't belong. Derek had the midnight to 2 shift, and he spent it listening more than looking. In the silence, his ears could detect movement that eyes would miss. The scrape of fabric on rock, the metallic click of a weapon being readied, the breathing of someone trying very hard to remain still. At 0130 he heard it, a sound that didn't belong. Not wind, not sand settling, not the small mammals that moved at night. Metal, brief, controlled, the sound of someone checking their weapon, preparing for action. He activated his night vision and scanned the sector where the sound originated. Nothing, but someone was out there, moving with discipline that matched his own. Then he saw the muzzle flash, 800 meters northeast. A brief spark that was extinguished almost before it registered. A single shot. He tracked the likely trajectory toward a position the patrol hadn't scouted yet, but would pass in the morning. Possible contact, northeast, he whispered into the radio. Single shot. Origin approximately 800 meters. The team woke instantly, weapons oriented. But there was no follow-up. No additional shots. No movement. 5 minutes later, Derek's radio crackled with a priority message from command. Reaper 16, be advised. Infrared satellite detected heat signature at your projected 0700 route. Signature eliminated approximately 2 minutes ago. Source unknown. Derek understood. Someone had been waiting, an ambush on their planned route. Someone else had eliminated the threat before the patrol arrived. In the middle of the night, at 800 meters, in near total darkness, conditions that made even trained snipers hesitate. Command, Reaper 16. We heard the shot. No visual on shooter. Copy, Reaper 16. Continue mission as planned. Be advised. Unseen assets may be operating in your area. Unseen assets. Official acknowledgement wrapped in vague language. Command knew something or suspected something, but wasn't sharing details. Derek looked at the darkness and wondered if she could hear him. If you're out there, he said quietly to himself and to the night. Thank you. There was no response, but he hadn't expected one. The final approach to the compound happened at first light. The sun rose fast in the desert, turning the sky from purple to orange to white in minutes. The patrol moved carefully, clearing the building room by room. It was empty as intelligence had predicted, abandoned months ago, stripped of anything valuable. But it wasn't the compound that mattered. It was proving they could reach it safely, establish presence, deny the enemy freedom of movement. Every successful patrol changed the calculus, made the next one easier. Derek stood on the compound's roof and surveyed the terrain they'd crossed. 3 days, multiple engagements avoided or prevented, 0 casualties, operational success by every metric. Reaper 16 to command. Objective secured. 0 contact. Recommend establishing permanent position. Copy, Reaper 16. Hold position for follow-on forces. ETA 6 hours. He turned to his team. They looked exhausted but satisfied. They'd done their job. They'd survived their first deployment to hostile territory. What they didn't know, what he suspected they might never know, was how much help they'd received. 600 meters away, she collapsed her hide. The sun was rising, which meant thermal signatures would become unreliable within the hour. Time to move. She'd remained in position for 4 days, longer than recommended, but the mission had required it. She buried her waist, scattered sand over her position, ensured no trace remained. In 3 days, wind would erase even the subtle depression where she'd lain. The desert was the perfect accomplice. It swallowed evidence, kept secrets, revealed nothing. Her next position was already selected, 12 kilometers northwest, where another patrol would need overwatch in 72 hours. She'd walk there, avoiding roads, avoiding contact, avoiding existence. Before she left, she allowed herself one moment to watch the compound. The soldiers on the roof were talking, laughing. They'd earned that relief. They'd done good work. She hoped they never learned her name. Hope and invisibility were linked. Both required faith in something you couldn't see. Then she turned and walked into the desert, her footprints disappearing behind her as the wind began its morning work. 3 weeks later, Derek sat in a briefing room listening to an intelligence analyst explain casualty rates. Lieutenant Colonel Preston Hayes pointed to a chart that showed patrol outcomes over 6 months. Sector 7 has a 92% survival rate over the last 6 months, Hayes said, significantly higher than adjacent sectors with similar threat levels. Sector 6, for comparison, sits at 78%. Sector 8 at 81%. The statistical deviation is significant enough to warrant investigation. Why? Someone asked from the back of the room. Hayes shrugged. Unknown. We've attributed it to improved training, better intelligence. Maybe luck. Command wants to determine if there are tactical lessons we can apply elsewhere. Laura Brennan caught Derek's eye from across the room. She knew, or suspected, but the official line was luck. And officially, that's what it would remain. After the briefing, she pulled him aside. Your report about the invisible guardian. It's been classified above my clearance level. Which means what? Which means someone very important read it and decided the information was sensitive. That's all I can tell you. Derek nodded. He understood classification, operational security, need-to-know doctrine, but understanding didn't eliminate curiosity. Do you think she's still out there? He asked. Laura smiled slightly. Just a feeling? Well, if she is, she's doing a job most people don't have the discipline for. Watching people survive because of work you can never acknowledge. That takes a particular kind of strength. Derek returned to his unit. They ran 7 more patrols in Sector 7 over the next 2 months. Textbook operations. Clean approaches. No casualties. By the end, the soldiers joked that they were blessed, charmed, protected by guardian angels. They weren't entirely wrong. In a classified facility 7,000 miles away, a file was updated. Observer 7. Status: active. Effectiveness rating: exceptional. Psychological stability: stable. Recommended action: continued deployment. Indefinite duration. ***. The analyst who wrote the review never met Observer 7. Fewer than a dozen people knew her real name, and most of those had clearance levels that prevented casual conversation. She was a legend in certain circles, a ghost story in others, and completely unknown to the majority of the military she protected, which was exactly how it should be. In the desert that swallowed names and buried histories, she moved from position to position, watching new patrols navigate old dangers. Sometimes she fired. More often, she simply watched, her presence enough to deter attacks. Insurgents learned that certain sectors were cursed. Attacks failed for inexplicable reasons. Ambushes collapsed without trigger events. Snipers found their positions compromised by forces they couldn't see. They stopped operating in those sectors. Fear of the invisible was more powerful than fear of the seen. She never sought recognition. Recognition meant exposure, and exposure meant death. But on clear nights, when the desert wind carried sound across the dunes, she sometimes heard soldiers talking around their fires, telling stories about the guardian who watched from nowhere, speculating about who she was, what she looked like, why she did it, creating mythology from survival. She listened when conditions allowed, finding strange comfort in these distant voices speaking her unnamed legacy into existence. The why was simple. She'd chosen this life because someone had to live in the spaces between official operations. Someone had to be willing to sacrifice identity, comfort, recognition, everything that defined normal existence for the mission. The mission was survival, not her own but theirs, keeping soldiers alive who would never know her name or face. She wasn't a hero. Heroes had names, faces, stories. She was a function, an equation that balanced violence with precision, presence with absence, life with anonymity. And in the brutal mathematics of desert warfare, that equation saved lives. 6 months after Derek's first patrol, he was promoted to first sergeant and assigned to train new soldiers. He taught them tactics, discipline, situational awareness. But he also taught them something not in any manual. The desert is watching, he told one class. Not just the enemy. There are forces out there we don't see, can't communicate with, will never meet. They're the reason survival rates in certain sectors defy statistical analysis. They're the reason some of you will go home to your families. Who are they? A young private asked. I don't know, but I know they exist because I've seen the evidence. Shots fired from positions that should be empty. Enemies that retreat without provocation. Ambushes that collapse before they're sprung. You can call it luck if you want. I call it professionalism at a level most of us will never reach. Why don't they identify themselves? Because the moment they do, they become targets. Invisibility isn't just a tactic. It's a sacrifice. They give up recognition so we can have safety. The private seemed unsatisfied with the answer. But Derek wasn't trying to satisfy him. He was trying to prepare him for the reality that some protectors operated in shadows so deep that light never reached them. In the years that followed, Sector 7's survival rate remained statistically anomalous. Analysts proposed theories: terrain advantages, intelligence superiority, enemy force degradation. None of the theories fully explained the data, but soldiers who served there came home with stories. The guardian who fired once and disappeared. The angel who watched from ridges no one could reach. The ghost who bought their survival with perfect invisibility. The stories spread, evolved, became mythology. Some officers dismissed them as superstition. Others quietly acknowledged that in war, not everything that mattered could be measured or explained. Deep in the desert, where the sand erased footprints and the wind carried away voices, she continued her work. New patrols, new threats, same mission. She was older now, her body bearing the accumulated damage of thousands of hours in prone position, of temperature extremes, of isolation that would have broken most minds. Her knees ached in the cold. Her shoulders carried permanent tension from holding position. Her eyes showed the strain of endless hours behind a scope. But her skill had only sharpened with time. Her patience had deepened into something almost meditative. Her commitment was absolute, refined by years of choosing the mission over everything else. Comfort, recognition, the simple human need to be known. She'd become what she'd set out to become. A guardian without identity, a protector without recognition, a soldier whose greatest victories were the battles no one knew she'd fought, the invisible hand that tilted probability in favor of survival. And when soldiers returned home safely, kissed their families, resumed their lives intact and whole, they carried with them a debt they couldn't name to a person they'd never meet. That was enough, sufficient. In the end, invisibility wasn't about being forgotten. It was about being remembered in the survival of others. Every patrol that returned intact. Every soldier who grew old instead of dying young. Every family that remained whole. These were her monuments. They didn't bear her name. They didn't need to. The desert kept her secrets. The wind erased her tracks. And the men survived. That was the measure of silence. That was the legacy of the invisible. And somewhere on a ridge no map showed, in a position no satellite could detect, she adjusted her scope and prepared for the next mission. Because someone had to watch. Someone had to wait. Someone had to remain invisible so others could be seen. That someone was her.